Greetings, my name is Sophia. I'm a 40-year-old woman with quite a story to share. I became a single mom when my children were very young. My journey started when I met my ex-husband, Arthur, through mutual friends. He was everything I had hoped for in a partner. We both had stable jobs and were financially secure. While I had lost contact with my own family, Arthur's family welcomed me warmly. He was exactly what I was looking for, so I eagerly accepted when he proposed after 4 years of dating. Arthur always wanted to start a family. Although I was hesitant about having children, I decided to go along with his wishes to make him happy. But once our kids were born, I realized it was the best decision I could have made. Initially, Arthur was a fantastic father and husband. He took such good care of us that he often neglected his needs. I thought I had struck gold with him. However, things turned for the worse a few years after our children were born. Arthur's company hired a new coworker who he started spending a lot of time with. I had a bad feeling about this new friend from the start, and unfortunately, my instincts were right. Soon, Arthur began to neglect our family. He would come home from work and isolate himself, playing video games for hours. Despite my attempts to communicate with him, our conversations turned into heated arguments, with him complaining about feeling overwhelmed by responsibilities and calling me nagging. I wasn't asking for much. I just wanted him to contribute more at home. Then one day, Arthur wanted to take the kids to the park on his day off while I was at work. I was thrilled, thinking maybe he was returning to his old self, so I agreed without a second thought. While at work, I received a call from my father-in-law, William. It was common for him to check in, so I answered the call cheerfully. However, I could immediately tell something was wrong from his tone. I was on my way home from the grocery store when I noticed my kids alone at the park. Julia was crying, and Larry was trying to comfort her. Surprised, I called my father-in-law, William, who told me he and his wife had already picked them up and that the kids were now sleeping at their house. He explained that Arthur had taken them to the park at 9 a.m., but left them unattended soon after. William hadn't been able to reach Arthur. His phone was turned off. Concerned, I promised to try contacting him as well and thanked my in-laws for watching the kids. Despite my frustration, I expressed my gratitude to them. After hanging up, I tried calling Arthur, but like William had said, his phone was off. The rest of my workday was tough. I kept trying to call Arthur with no luck. Once work was over, I headed home, half hoping to find Arthur simply lost in his video games. I had discussed with William not to let the kids see any conflict, mindful of the strain Arthur and I were already experiencing. However, when I arrived home, something felt off. The house seemed too quiet. I called out for Arthur as I checked each room, but he was nowhere to be found. When I reached his den in the basement, I found it completely empty, confirming my worst fears. As I reached the quiet of our home, a wave of panic washed over me. Arthur's extensive gaming setup was gone, a setup he'd never moved since we had no other space for it. Climbing the stairs, I felt my breath shortening. When I entered our bedroom, I noticed all his clothes, usually piled in the corner, were gone. The drawers of his nightstand were empty, as was our shared wardrobe. Even his personal items were missing from the bathroom. It hit me hard. He had left us. Struggling to breathe, thoughts raced through my mind. How was I going to raise 2 kids alone? Could I manage on just my income? The prospect of picking up another job was daunting. It would mean even less time with my kids. In a frantic state, I repeatedly tried to call Arthur. My pride was the last thing on my mind. I was willing to beg him to return, but my calls and messages seemed blocked. Eventually, I regained some composure and drove back to my in-laws. My heart pounded with each mile closer to William and Hannah's house, where I needed to muster the strength to be strong for my children. They greeted me with smiles at the door, blissfully unaware of the turmoil. For a moment, their chatter about their day made me forget my overwhelming problems. However, Hannah picked up on my distress. She sent the kids to play so we could talk. Sitting in the living room, glass of water in hand, we started to discuss the day's events. "Did you manage to talk to Arthur?" Hannah asked. "No, I have no idea where he is, and I'm freaking out," I replied, the worry evident in my voice. I came home to find that Arthur had taken everything. All his belongings, from his clothes and toiletries to his gaming gear, were gone, as if he'd never lived with us. Devastated, I shared this with Hannah and William. "What do you mean, gone?" Hannah asked, clearly shocked. "As in, there's no trace of him ever being here," I replied. Furious, William said, "I can't believe he'd do this. That's not how I raised him." "Do you know where he might be?" Hannah inquired. "He could be at his friends' places or his favorite spots, but beyond that, I'm not sure," I answered. "Let's start by contacting his friends and checking those places. If we don't find anything, we'll consider involving the police," William suggested, though I was reluctant to take that step. So I began calling everyone we knew, even reaching out to some of Arthur's old high school friends. Meanwhile, Hannah and William spoke with their relatives and neighbors. We all spent days searching the city, trying to locate him. During this time, I also had to balance work and the kids. I was fortunate to get a week off after explaining my situation to my boss. Handling the kids' questions about their dad was much harder. They asked daily when he'd be back, and I told them he was on a business trip to spare their feelings. Thankfully, Hannah and William were a tremendous support. Eventually, we did have to involve the police, but they couldn't do much since Arthur had left voluntarily. He wasn't officially a missing person. That realization was crushing. I felt utterly betrayed and abandoned. All the promises Arthur and I made, like staying together forever and raising our kids well, seemed broken. I spent nights crying myself to sleep, unsure of how to face my children or explain that their father had left us. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, William and Hannah came over to check on me. Their presence was a small comfort in the overwhelming chaos of emotions and responsibilities. Before I knew it, tears were streaming down my face in front of William and Hannah, and soon they were crying too. We held each other in a silent embrace until our tears subsided. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to break down like that," I apologized. "There's every reason to cry," Hannah said gently. "You've lost a husband and we've lost a son. We understand your pain." "I guess we feel a bit guilty about his actions," William added, his voice filled with sorrow. "You shouldn't feel guilty," I reassured them. "Arthur made his own choices. It's not your fault." "Maybe it's something we did in raising him," William speculated. "That's nonsense," I countered firmly. "You raised him well. The fact that you're here with me and the kids now proves it. You could have left us to cope alone, but you didn't. You're here helping us." "You're right," Hannah agreed. "We could never leave you. You and the kids are our family." "And that's exactly how we feel," William said. "We're here for you and the kids, always. Don't hesitate to ask for anything." After that night, we began to heal from the hurt and betrayal. I eventually had to explain to my kids that their father wasn't coming back. They seemed to have sensed it already because they were surprisingly composed. Their only question was if their grandparents and I were also going to leave them. I promised them we never would. For the first time, my anger towards Arthur wasn't just about his leaving. It was about the insecurity he had instilled in our children. But William, Hannah, and I did our best to reassure them, to show them they were loved and that we were always going to be there. The kids slowly returned to their cheerful selves, and life began to feel more normal. About 6 years after Arthur left, I stopped trying to contact him. I had spent years hoping to hear from him, but it was time to let go and focus fully on our lives without him. 6 years had passed, and I realized just how much Arthur had missed in our kids' lives. They had nearly forgotten about him, and honestly, I no longer saw any reason to wish him back. A decade after he left, our lives had significantly improved. Larry was attending his dream college on a full scholarship, and Julia was excelling in her classes. I was earning enough to support us comfortably. Hannah and William had become even more integral to our family. They practically lived with us now due to their advancing age and declining health. They had been my pillars during the toughest times, and I wanted them to enjoy their golden years as much as possible. Adjusting to our new life took years, but we were in a good place. That is, until William fell seriously ill. Hannah and I took turns staying by his hospital bed when he slipped into a coma. The house was somber. Laughter and smiles were rare during that grim period. However, things took a turn when William miraculously woke up from the coma. He was still frail, and the doctors warned us he didn't have much time left, but he was alive, and that was something to celebrate. We all spent as much time as we could with him in the hospital. Despite his weakness, William's spirit remained strong. He even managed to lift our spirits, insisting on calling his lawyer to the hospital to rearrange his affairs and update his will. He wanted everything to be for us, even in his condition. When the lawyer arrived, William asked for privacy to discuss his will, leaving the rest of us outside. "I'm sorry I couldn't let you guys in," he apologized afterward. "It's okay, just get your rest," I reassured him, trying to hide my concern. "I just wanted to surprise you guys." William chuckled weakly. "That's incredibly thoughtful of you, especially now," I replied, touched by his consideration. "We don't want this surprise for a while, though," Hannah added softly, her voice tinged with sadness. "At least this way there's something to look forward to," William said, trying to keep the mood light. "But I have one condition. You have to promise me to stick to the will no matter what. Make sure my estate is divided exactly as I've planned." "Of course," I promised William, assuring him everything would be handled exactly as he wished. Sadly, about 3 weeks after waking up, William passed away peacefully in his sleep. His loss hit me hard. He had been like a father to me, the only man who consistently supported and guided me. He was also a father figure to my children, playing a significant role in their upbringing. Hannah, the kids, and I were all devastated. There was so much grief, with all of us mourning someone so dear to our hearts. I took it upon myself to manage all the paperwork and organize the funeral services, knowing Hannah wasn't up to the task. The funeral was held 4 days later and was attended by many, a testament to how much William was loved. Yet, during the service, I couldn't help but feel a surge of anger, knowing Arthur probably knew of his father's passing. His obituary was in the newspaper after all, yet he didn't show up. Part of me was relieved, though. It was perhaps for the best that only those who truly loved William were there. In the days that followed, as we continued to grieve, we also accessed William's will. It brought us a pleasant surprise. William had divided his estate among the 4 of us, favoring the kids with a larger share, which I was profoundly thankful for. They needed it more than Hannah and I did. Intriguingly, he had also left something for Arthur, a letter. While I was tempted to open it, I respected William's explicit wish that only Arthur should read it. I can't say I was surprised when Arthur finally showed up. Surprisingly, Arthur showed up when Larry was back at university and Julia was away at school. Seeing him after all these years filled me with anger. Hannah felt the same way. Arthur looked like a shell of his former self. He was gaunt, his bones prominent under his thin skin, and his eyes were hollow and bloodshot. He used to be muscular, but now his arms and legs were mere twigs. His voice was raspy, suggesting years of neglect, possibly due to substance abuse. Although I understand that addiction is a serious illness that needs compassion and treatment, I found it hard to extend that empathy to Arthur. He had everything: a loving family, a perfect home, a great job, and a good life. He chose to abandon all that, presumably for a life of substance abuse. "What the hell are you doing here?" I asked sharply. "I'm here to see you guys," Arthur replied weakly. "Cut the crap, Arthur. You disappeared for 9 years and now suddenly you want to reconnect? I know I messed up, but I want to make amends. I don't think that's possible, and you know it. So why are you here? If you don't have a good reason, I might have to call the police." "No need to be so aggressive. I came because I found out my dad passed away. I wanted to see my family." "Was your dad's death the only thing that brought you back?" "Well, yeah, my dad meant everything to me. Learning that he's gone shifted my entire perspective. I regret not being here with him." "Why did you leave in the first place?" "I guess I was just overwhelmed with everything in my life and I ran away from it." Hearing his excuses only deepened my disdain. "You're disgusting," I couldn't help but say. When Arthur asked if his dad had left him anything, I immediately felt my anger spike, and from the glance Hannah and I shared, I knew she felt the same way. It was clear that Arthur hadn't come because he cared about his father or wanted to reconnect with us. He was here for whatever inheritance he might have left. Despite my urge to confront him, Hannah squeezed my hand to calm me down. She knew, as I did, that William had indeed left something for Arthur, and it wasn't anything Arthur would be pleased with. Quietly, Hannah went to fetch the letter William had left for his son. During the tense silence, Arthur had a smug look on his face, as if he had already won. I had to muster all my self-control not to scoff at his arrogance. When Hannah returned and handed him the letter, Arthur's expression was eager. He tore open the envelope and began to read, but as he did, his smirk faded, replaced by a growing scowl. Finishing the letter, he glared at me with intense hatred and accused, You poisoned my father's mind." "Excuse me?" I responded, taken aback. "He left me nothing, absolutely nothing. He said it's because you were more of a daughter to him than I was a son. How could he do this to me? Didn't I matter at all?" "Well, you did disappear for a while. Maybe that's why," I pointed out calmly. "How can you say that? Do you guys not care about me at all?" "We care about you just as much as you cared for your family these past 9 years, I replied, my voice steady. Stunned by the reality of the situation, Arthur was left speechless. Arthur couldn't grasp that he was being treated just as he had treated us, which seemed absurd given his audacity to show up after so long and expect his inheritance. He hadn't been there in his father's final days, yet he thought he deserved something. William had spent his last days writing a letter that effectively disowned Arthur, and honestly, knowing that made me feel vindicated. When Arthur began to protest, Hannah quickly shut him down. She wouldn't hear any of it and told him to leave our house. Arthur threatened to sue me for the house, but I reminded him that by abandoning the property, he had forfeited any legal claim to it. He had nothing in his name, and the realization left him looking as pale as a ghost, while I felt a sense of satisfaction. It was sad that it came at the cost of William's passing, but in a way, Arthur received the consequences of his actions. After the confrontation, Arthur left and didn't contact us again, which was a relief. We had grown accustomed to his absence, and our lives quickly returned to normal. Although it was tough moving forward without William, his decisive action in those final days showed his deep love for us and gave us the strength to continue. His legacy was a reminder of his protective love, steering us away from the potential turmoil Arthur's selfishness could have caused.